the same drink that a woman drinks, the woman, if they both weigh exactly the same, the woman is going to have more alcohol in her body because it's being distributed into a smaller pool of blood, basically. All right, think of the two containers. We are walking bags of liquid here. If you take a shot and you pour it into a beaker that's got, let's just say for simple math here, it's got 68 units of water versus 55 units of water. The one that you distribute the shot into the 55 is going to be more potent still. But I've got a note here. The blood alcohol concentration will not distribute equally in all areas of the body. Capillaries, arteries, and veins. It's all different. Okay? When you have a drunk driving suspect that's arrested and taken to the hospital, post-absorptive phase matters. For one thing, there are studies that show that during the prior to peak back, a person who blows into a Datamaster or provides a breath sample is going to blow higher than what they actually should. And at the hospital, if they're drawing blood, they draw venous blood. This is weird because you think that alcohol just, boom, goes across the body and gets distributed very quickly. But there's going to be a difference between the venous blood and the arterial blood. Breath testing primarily tests, or at source, is arterial, whereas blood draws at the hospital are going to be drawing from a vein. And we don't assume that everything is equal, okay? We're actually only concerned about what alcohol is in the brain. But we don't allow police officers to test the amount of alcohol in your brain because they'd flub it up and you'd be dead, more times than not. But that's what we're really concerned about is how much alcohol is actually in the brain. Now, elimination, this is your third phase of the lifespan of alcohol in the human body. As soon as alcohol is consumed, it starts being eliminated. Now, Jim, you asked earlier about the stomach versus the small intestine. I was oversimplifying. When you take a drink, alcohol is going to be absorbed through the mucus lining in your mouth. It's going to be absorbed through the esophagus going on the way down. That's where you get that nice pleasant burn. And then down in the stomach, of course, it's absorbed there. And then ultimately it's also absorbed through the small intestines. Studies have shown, however, that alcohol, for whatever reason, is not readily absorbable through the skin. So it's interesting. I don't know why. It just, this invisible creeper that's able to sneak everywhere does not get absorbed rapidly through the skin. Once the alcohol goes into the small intestines, though, some of it will continue down the small intestines. Some of it will immediately enter the bloodstream, but the majority of it is going to go to the liver. The liver is a really cool organ. 4.5 pounds, I believe. It's the largest gland in the human body. And in medical school, if you were going to medical school right now and your teacher or instructor came over and hit you up with a question and they asked you what reaction this was caused by, if you weren't sure the answer, you'd say, the liver! And you would probably be right. Every mysterious question that you can't answer, you can always point to the liver. The liver has so many different functions in addition to what you assume that it has. It has a little bit to play with everything. When the alcohol gets into the small intestine there, and it makes its way on over to the liver, it goes through what's known as first-pass metabolism. Now, first-pass metabolism is interesting because they had Oprah Winfrey a few years ago opine that people who had had gastric bypass surgery to lose weight, that these people were addicted to food. That's why they were so big and they had to have this stomach surgery done. So they take out the stomach, they replace it with some little tiny thing. And it interferes with first-pass metabolism. Oprah opined that perhaps they would substitute their food addictions for an alcohol addiction. And Oprah carries some weight. If Oprah has an opinion about something, people listen. And so a bunch of researchers got together and they said, oh, we're going to find out if Oprah's right. And they went on out and they studied this, and they took it. It was a small group. It was either 8 or 16 people, but it made all the news. It was on the radio, it was in the newspapers, and everyone was shocked and gasped because they fed all these folks, I think it was 5 ounces of red wine. 5 ounces of red wine. And whenever we talk about human experimentation, such as that, you have to get approvals. Otherwise, people frown upon that. You have to ensure that the subject's safety is at all times properly observed, so you can't just go recklessly out and expect to get published research by doing things that actually put people in jeopardy. So you have to get approval for these things, because otherwise it harkens back to the Nazi Germany experiments, okay? And so this is actually, it's pretty tightly controlled, and you won't get funded research and you won't get published if you violate these things. So they were only allowed to feed these folks 5 ounces of red wine because the surgery that they had undergone, you're not supposed to drink. And it can have some detrimental effect. So they feed them all 5 ounces of red wine, and they report their findings. And Oprah, of course, is correct. It was incredible that a 240-pound man blew a .15 on a breath machine and indicated to the researchers that he felt no ill effects. He didn't feel intoxicated in the slightest bit. And they were shocked because obviously these formerly fat people had substituted their addictions. And not only had they substituted their addictions, they had become hardcore alcoholics overnight. And after this made its waves through the initial couple weeks, somebody spoke up and said, why didn't they do blood testing? Oops. Yeah, they were relying upon breath tests in order to conduct this research. And if we were to do a Widmark equation, we could take this 240-pound man, do the math. We could even do the little enema trick with 5 ounces of red wine. He'd never make it to a .15. That number is absolutely impossible. There was not enough in his 68% water weight for him to be a .15. Doesn't matter if you pour it right directly into it. It did not equal a .15. And of course, the reason why the folks were not complaining about the ill effects of alcohol is because they only had 5 ounces of red wine. It's not a lot. But yet their numbers were off the charts in terms of what they were supposedly blowing. One of the problems, though, is that a person who's had this surgery doesn't experience first-pass metabolism in the same fashion that your normal person would, because of the way that they've messed up the stomach and everything else. This is what I'm told, at least. That one possible explanation as to why there might be a higher breath score. I think it's got a lot more to do with just contamination of mouth, alcohol, and that sort of thing. There is an enzyme produced, actually it's a group of enzymes produced by the liver that we generally refer to as alcohol dehydrogenase. It's truncated ADH that will break down ethanol. It breaks it down first into acetaldehyde and then to acetic acid. The byproduct of this is carbon dioxide, water, and heat, of all weird things. Heat. It's oxidation is what's going on. Oxidation of the alcohol molecule. One other thing. This little thing here, this is kind of cool. That's your liver, right? It's over here, it's on your right side. This little thing here leads to your belly button. This is what would filter the blood from your mother back when you were in the womb. The blood would get filtered through there. Just an interesting little aside. So as soon as you drink alcohol, though, this alcohol dehydrogenation process begins, and it starts to break down the alcohol. And actually, the majority of alcohol that you drink is actually going to be broken down before it ever reaches anywhere. All right, picture little chemical reactions going on here. Boom, boom, boom. It's like kind of like watching Star Wars or something like that, where all the TIE fighters are blowing up way off in the distance, right? Boom, 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 boom. But some of it is going to continue on. It's going to go to the heart, and it's going to get distributed to the rest of the body. Now, the elimination rates as to what the probation departments tell you of 0.015 grams per hour, as I've indicated, this is a scientific term. Big fat lie. It's not true. When they look on their little charts and they try to calculate things, or worse, you get some expert, and the Michigan State Police last summer at the criminal law section for the state bar, the now former head of the Michigan State Police indicated that they were no longer going to testify about retrograde extrapolation, but now it's under somebody else's command now. We'll see if that actually holds true. But when they talk about retrograde extrapolation is a fancy way of saying that if you get a breath or blood alcohol result of, say, a 0.15, but the driving was 3 hours before, they can simply add 0.015 to it, and you'll get a super drunk then. Or at least that's kind of what they're going to say. And what does the jury do with that? When they say, well, he was obviously higher at the time of driving. It's not true. I've already shown you how it's not true, but they add those numbers on there. And Adatsi was horrible about this. Adatsi would come in without knowing what the subject had ate, what he had drank, when he stopped drinking, any of those factors, and he'd simply add that 0.015 on for every hour that had elapsed since the time of the driving.
That assumes the person had a drink a long time ago. If you have a drink and then you get right behind the wheel, you're not going to have any in for a while. It takes a while to absorb. And then if they're measuring you 2-3 hours later, it's actually going to be higher than your blood alcohol.
Or it could be the same. You know, that's the weird thing, is that there's just, when you talk about looking back and trying to theorize as to what it was, you know, the guy might have been going up, and then all this time elapses, he's reached some point of peak back in between, and he's come back down. Mysteriously, he's the exact same. Could be higher, could be lower, they just don't know. And unless you know what the time of peak back is, you just don't know. And you won't be able to ascertain what peak back is, except to say that somewhere within 75 minutes, if the person was on an empty stomach and hadn't eaten, and we know what time he stopped drinking and all this, it leaves so much wiggle room that there's been a number of courts that have kicked it and said that it's not reliable enough, and yet there's others that say, well, it goes to weight. Do we need to take a break? Everybody's good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just toss in one?
Yes.
On this, I had a case come up where I had a client take an alcohol tolerance test just for this reason. So he went into a doctor's office on an empty stomach. He drank 4 ounces of alcohol. And according to the doctor and his blood test there in the office, his peak absorption was 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
Completely reasonable.
So these assumptions are just based on average.
Absolutely. You know, one time I showed up in the Oakland County Circuit Court, and it was a drunk driving case, of course. And is it Dragovic?
Yeah.
The medical examiner?
Yes.
The prosecutor had brought him in. Maybe I met him once, okay? And I'm thinking to myself, my God, what's this guy here for, right? And he comes up there and he sits down and he goes through his laundry list of this massive career on how he's qualified in every aspect. And I'm like, God, he's going to kill me. And I got up there and I started asking him some simple questions like, can we say when peak absorb, or when he became post-absorptive? Nope. Can we say that he might have even been sober at the time? Yep. Can we say this? Can we say that? The prosecutor's sitting there and he's just shaking his head and he's like, no, because he was honest and he was talking about the real deal. You know, he wasn't trying to get to that point. The Widmark Equation, the beta, is the most interesting thing out of it. Beta is the rate of elimination. I kind of touched upon this earlier. Beta ranges from 0.005 up to 0.03, and it could even be higher than 0.03 per hour. Now what's beta? Beta is the burn-off, okay? It's not 0.015 per hour. Time to grow up. It's not simple ever. 0.005 can be some of your Native Americans, okay? Especially if they don't drink. This is because way back when, the Native Americans here in North America did not generally drink alcohol. They were introduced to alcohol once the Europeans came. You will also see slightly higher numbers with Chinese. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead there. development of alcohol, those 9,000 years ago, forward. One of the greatest scourges of mankind ever throughout the history has been illness and disease. Illness and disease is primarily obtained through bad water, okay? Bad water has been the source of the scourge for many, many years. One of the ways that you can cure this water to make it drinkable is to turn it into a fermented beverage. It doesn't matter that a bunch of people in Brazil are spitting into the bowl. It's safe to drink once it ferments, right? So, and you're going to know when you drink an alcoholic beverage, if it's gone bad, it doesn't taste right at all, okay? If it tastes right, then it's good to drink, and it's not going to make you sick because there's no bacteria or viruses or whatnot in it. So that's what Europeans did, was they started drinking a lot because it was safer than drinking their dirty, nasty water. The Chinese, on the other hand, found that if you boil water, they were a little bit more civilized, not looking for the party. They found that if you boil water, it makes it safe to drink, but frankly, boiled water is really boring. So you take some herbs called tea, throw it on in there, you boil it, that's a little bit better. I can tolerate that now. And so they drank a lot of teas. Europeans drank a lot of alcoholic beverages, and to this day, as a matter of your genetics or whatnot, if you are of Western European descent, you are automatically born with the gift of an average of 0.017 per hour, just by virtue of the fact that your ancestors were a bunch of boozers. Now, that said, somebody who's from China, that genetic lineage, this might be a 0.010, okay? It's going to be lower than the average. Unless the person's a drinker. If the person's a drinker, your liver, just like working out, doing those curls, well, you can work out that liver the same way, and your liver's going to become more effective. So, up here at this 0.03, that's your alcoholic, okay? That's your alcoholic before his or her liver fails on him. Once it fails on them, then, man, they got a lot of problems because they're drinking the same amount that they used to drink before their liver went into the cirrhosis state, and now it's going down, down, down. You could also have, like if you've got bad liver function, you could be also down here, okay? And that's not good if it's caused by liver disease. Now we start to get into the science. Henry's Law. Henry's Law is this headspace that we talked about earlier, okay? It's the gas that's over this liquid in here. We know that if there's alcohol down here, that we can measure the alcohol up here. Alcohol is a volatile. A volatile is a substance that wants to transform itself, okay? It wants to turn into a gas. It's, it's ready to rock and roll at any given time. When you, this is exactly the wording here. At a constant temperature, the amount of a given gas that dissolves in a given type and volume of liquid is directly proportional to the partial pressure of that gas in equilibrium with that liquid. Sounds fancy, right? I'm going to give you a very simple explanation. Oh, soda pop. When you open up a bottle of pop and you hear that hiss, the carbon dioxide that's in there that makes all the bubbles and makes pop fun to drink there's a high temperature up above in the headspace, that little space above the liquid. When you open it up, some of that is released, okay? And that's when the bubbles start to come out of the liquid. And you don't see the bubbles prior to that though, okay? You could actually, if you were able to keep that container sealed, you could pierce it, like with a needle, doing a blood test up in Lansing, pierce through it, take a little sample of that gas, and you could tell how much carbon dioxide was in the pop. Because they're going to be this established relationship here, okay? But the problem with Henry's Law is that it requires a closed system. It requires a constant temperature, okay? Temperature and a closed system matter. As we see, this is, wasn't sure how to go from headspace or Henry's Law into this, so I just jumped right into it. Does Henry's Law apply to the human body? Okay? You're breathing in, you're breathing out. Is there going to be a relationship between the amount of dissolved volatiles in your bloodstream, i.e. alcohol, and the gas that you breathe out? That was the theory, okay? Now this dates back to 1938. I don't know, 1938 I believe is when Dr. Harger invented the drunkometer, okay? Now, this is interesting because he wanted to see if there was a correlation or if there was if Henry's law applied to blood. And so he took blood, or was it water? That was blood. Blood and alcohol, mixed it in a vat or thing and shook it up. And then measured the headspace over it. Well, of course that worked. It's no different than using water like I've got in my wet bath simulator there. But he measured that and he determined that it was 1 to 2100. That was the partition ratio of the headspace over the liquid. And this number continues to this day. This number does not play here in globally though. If you go to Australia, it's 2000. I think New Zealand's also 2000. But this is 1938 and that's the number that was established. And I'll show you some of these numbers here in a moment. But here we're gonna switch from the digestive system to the circulatory system. Okay, your blood's going through all the capillaries, all the veins, all the arteries, coursing through. Again, we're only concerned about what alcohol is there up in the brain, but we're measuring these other areas here. You go to the hospital for a blood draw, they're going to draw it here or here or here or here. For a breath test, they want to go to the lungs. Now, alcohol can be secreted through many different fashions, okay? Sweat, tears, very small amount in urine, okay? The idea that when you have to go to the bathroom after you've had a few drinks, it's not alcohol that you're urinating out. It's that breakdown of carbon dioxide, water, and heat from alcohol dehydrogenase occurring. Okay, this is additional water that's produced as a byproduct of the breakdown of alcohol. But a small amount of alcohol will directly be excreted through the bladder. A small amount of alcohol can be excreted through the skin. That's how these little, what are they called, the scram tethers, Lindsay Lohan things. That's how they determine whether or not the person has consumed alcohol, transdermal. It's measuring whether or not the person has consumed alcohol through the skin. You can also do it through tears. Big thing coming up right now is spit. You know, they're trying to develop drug tests for spit, but you can also presumably measure spit. And the vitreous eye humor. That's the liquid portion of your eye. They primarily use that for when there's a person who's a decedent. And if any of you attended the SFST course, I'm repeating myself, but there was an Ohio cop that was killed in a horrible vehicle accident. Everyone was grieving, of course. And toxicology came back and said he was drunk. And people were livid pissed because they said this officer did not even drink and how dare you tarnish his reputation. And of course what it was is that the idiot who ran the toxicology test had drawn blood from wherever and it had spoiled the sugars, the glucose, the bacteria, all that good sort of stuff, fermentation in the body. It starts to occur instantly. That's why dead bodies stink, fermentation, right? So they measured his blood, and yeah, it came back positive for alcohol because alcohol is very easy to create. They tested his vitreous eye humor, went on into the eye, drew out that fluid because that is not generally exposed to the same sorts of bacteria that the other portions of the body would be exposed to, and they found no alcohol. So, they apologized. Man's dead. Anyway, so what we're concerned about with breath testing, though, is you've got the circulatory system going away. You got to get oxygen to all the various extremities, otherwise you die. And you got to get rid of that carbon dioxide, the waste product from your cells. You got to get it out so you can get more oxygen in. In, out, in, out. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. A very small amount of alcohol will be excreted through the breath. Just like the tears, just like the sweat. But it's so small, we've already talked about it. It's 2,100 times smaller than what's actually in the blood. It's not intentionally being excreted through the breath. It's not like you've got some sort of a liver lung function that's trying to get rid of this alcohol. It's just kind of a little freeloading passenger that's traveling along with the carbon dioxide when it gets expelled through the expired breath. Down here, we've got the alveoli. These are tiny little sacs. They're 1/10 of a millimeter across. I don't want to misstate it. They're very small. There's a lot of them. All right. They're exposed to this air, and that you're breathing in, and they will suck up that oxygen, and they will excrete that carbon dioxide. Okay. As a result of that, you breathe it out, and then we do our little drunkometer test, and we try to establish if there's a relationship there. Does Henry's law apply? It's not a closed system. That's the problem. But there's certainly going to be some sort of a relationship there. Just like there's some sort of a relationship between the transdermal nature of alcohol. Does it make it accurate, though? I mean, what's it called again? Sorry? The Lindsay Lohan thing. The
Tether. Tether.
Yeah, the scram tether can ascertain, sort of, that a person has consumed alcohol. Now, of course, we all know if you've had probation violations that there is a margin of error there, and sometimes it will create a false positive when a person wasn't actually drinking alcohol. But does it do it accurately? That's the question. Can it accurately quantify it? And we have found that there is a relationship there, okay? And I mean, let's be honest here. The majority of people that are breath tested are going to be a relatively close result to what their blood is, right? But is it Henry's law? Now at this time, I need to introduce an important concept here. Tidal breath versus deep lung air, okay? Deep lung air is this idea that it's getting closer to alveolar air. Alveolar air cannot actually be tested. There's just no way to do it, okay? You'd have to collapse the lungs in order to test it. But the idea is that the deeper you get, the closer you're going to get to this true alveolar air. It's going to be closer. And this I don't really want to go there. This is getting to be around 3 o'clock in the morning when I put this in. So this is the 2100 to 1. And I'll jump back to this idea of what we're talking about in just a second here, but I've got these numbers in here. The 2100 to 1, okay, is not necessarily a given. This is passed by your lawmakers, okay? This is decided as a matter of policy that they're going to write this into the law. That's where your 210 liters comes from. And all that they do is they take the breath machine and they say, all right, well, we're going to measure it per this 210 liters. What the actual numbers boil down to, A.W. Jones, 2,000 to 2,452. Now, you'll see over here that the means are always, a little bit higher than 2,100 to 1. But 2,100 to 1 is just the average. So theoretically, it's 50% are higher, 50% are lower. Okay? And the state lab experts will say that it's actually 2,300 to 1. I don't think that number is actually anywhere in the literature. It's just oftentimes repeated. It's actually like 2,285 to 1 is what they came up with in the study that those toxicologists are referring to. Yes, Jim?
I guess this all boils down to, it sounds like there's a range.
There is a range.
Even throwing the machine aside, just in the breath itself there's going to be a range.
Correct. How much alcohol that you blow out as a free rider walking along with that carbon dioxide when you blow out is going to be different from the next person. And it might even be different for you.
Each time you do it, right?
Not necessarily each time you do it, but based upon circadian rhythms. What time of the day it is. Is it noon? Is it night? Is it morning? Is it dusk? Those natural biorhythms, known as circadian rhythms, can have an impact on what your particular breath to blood correlation is going to be. And how do you, the lawmakers get around it by just saying it's 210. But it's not 210. 210 is what's written into the statute. Kurt Dubowski, 1900 to 2500. This is the 2300, the mean right there from Dubowski. But Dubowski here, all right, these are the published numbers. If you look at Dubowski's raw numbers, he had extreme numbers down near 500. 500. These are people that were participating in a study. So they weren't dead people, and they weren't, laid up in the hospital undergoing some major trauma surgery or something like that. These are participants in the study. 500 there means that the person is going to blow 4 times higher than what he or she actually is. That means that that person, for whatever reason, is excreting through their expired breath a lot of alcohol. But these extreme numbers do not impact the statistical majority. Okay, so the fact you've got one guy out there that's going to be wrongfully convicted, I don't know. And there's no way of fixing this, though, Jim.
But it sounds, because I always like making those arguments.
Oh yeah, it's a great argument.
I love those arguments, and I didn't know that. So we say, okay, well, we know there's a range of Datamaster.
Yes.
But there's also this range just on your breath itself, which is going to exist somewhere.
It doesn't matter how much they improve a breath testing instrument.
Right. It's kind of like
You
lunch.
can have the
Always gonna
best
have that.
instrument, theoretically, 1,000 times better than whatever we've got on the market right now. And it will still not fix this problem.
Because you can't know. It's just like.
And the problem with this number is that even if we take, well, I've got this down here. South Carolina law enforcement did a test. They did some weird and hokey stuff with their test, but they did it for a period of years. They wanted to do their little retrograde extrapolation. They came up with better numbers when they did their retrograde extrapolation by, slightly rising it up if they thought that too much time. In other words, they were able to play with the data. But this is where they didn't play with the data. They just simply did a simultaneous breath and blood test, and they came up with 1633 to 2560. But it was only 68 subjects. But that's still a pretty significant number. But to think that people could be down at 1633, regular everyday people, all right, that's below the 1700 to 1 that we oftentimes hear as the outer range. This is regular people being arrested for drunk driving down in South Carolina. LaBianca, Dominic LaBianca, has suggested that we do 1700 to 1. He did this through statistical models by talking about standard deviations. And if you bring it out to a certain point, you're going to capture the vast majority of people, and reasonable doubt dictates that it should be 1700 to 1 if you're going to engage in breath testing. That's controversial, of course, but it's a good argument, All right, now there's Mike Ystala. Mike Ystala is out of Washington State. He's got a web page. You just look him up. It's like mystala.com. Funky spelling, but he's easy to find, fortunately, because of that funky spelling of his name. He has written about Henry's Law and about breath testing and come right out and said breath testing doesn't work. Or at least it doesn't work the way that everybody assumes it works. Okay? We've all been assuming that it's this deep lung air that we're testing, that it's alveolar air that we're trying to test. And what he has indicated is that the exchange between the breath and the blood and the alveoli assumes that the ethanol exchange is the same as oxygen and carbon dioxide. Just like I was talking about a minute ago. You're breathing in, you're breathing out, you got this free riding passenger. And Ystala has found that that's not true. And this goes all the way back to that specific gravity of alcohol and how alcohol is in the human body and how it responds chemically. Alcohol has a higher solubility and it exchanges higher in the airway, while those with the lower solubility exchange lower in the airway, such as the alveolar sacs.
One of the things you got to pull out when you had the whole, several slides ago about the
Yes.
dehydrogenase.
Yes.
Our current, and as you know, with State v. King out of Seattle, which we've learned in our training, these guys don't know, but in our trainings, one of the difficulties is when you're looking at this concentration, the one thing our Datamaster has, and even when Jim, or when Fusco comes here later today, he's going to tell you that the way that Michigan does it, we're not even sure that we are differentiating between choline esterase or the actual, there's a combination, an acetone combination that's in the breath output, and our machine, and I'm interested at the DMTs, but our last machine could not necessarily distinguish between the two. So what's coming out of the alveolar lung sacs may not even be pure alcohol to begin with. It
Well,
may be something
this
in
is
between.
This is what Ystala is talking about. When you breathe into a breath machine, the machine is looking for an alcohol curve. This is rapidly increasing and then a plateau, okay? And there's been a number of authors that have shown that the longer you blow, the higher it goes. And it's not significant, okay? But it's not a plateau. If you do a simulator on a wet bath, it goes immediately up and flat line across. No doubt about it, okay? But human breath has this curve to it. Why does it have this curve, whereas a simulator is just a straight line up and over? And it's because alcohol in the human body doesn't respond like a wet bath simulator. Hold on. As you breathe out, all those mucus areas, all the water holding areas, think of your esophagus, it's full of spit, right? Alcohol has that affinity towards water. The alcohol is all throughout the entire sample, and that's why we see this increase going up, is it's picking up alcohol from all areas. It's not just the deep lung air that's being tested. It's a combination of all these other forms of alcohol, or all these other areas and sources of alcohol. We're not wet bath simulators. Yes, Steve?
Now, it says time and seconds, and you're talking about how the longer you blow, the higher it goes. How much time are we talking about? Put this in perspective for me, please.
I don't know, 10 seconds,
I can't
15
hear you
seconds?
with your hands in front.
10 seconds, 15 seconds?
Okay.
You're trying to get to that, you're trying to exhale all the breath, okay? But of course, if you really try to blow out as much as you possibly can, your body won't let you blow out all the air in your lungs, okay? But the longer you blow, well, and this also, we're going to get right back into this, temperature, all right? You're going to come closer to a core temperature, and that's going to, it's going to keep going up just a little bit. And this is Simpson, okay? Dennis Simpson out of Western Michigan University talks about this, but there's other people that talk about it too. I don't think that this is something you stake a defense on to say the longer you blow, the higher it is. We're talking the difference here of just a little bit, but there's been this paradigm shift with Ystala, that the people who originally did all this research weren't respiratory physicians, which Ystala is. And Henry's law does not exactly fit with a human body because we're not a closed system. And we're not even, frankly, dealing with a solid or a constant temperature, which I'll show you here. The drunkometer, that one that was developed by Harger back in 1938, collected the motor's breath into a balloon. See the little balloon there? The breath sample was then pumped through a reagent. If there was alcohol in the breath sample, the solution changed the color. The greater the color change, the more alcohol there was present in the breath. Think about the balloon. Now this is going way back in history. I love this history stuff because it gives you a perspective where we're coming from and where we're going to in the future. Henry's assumptions, all right? Temperature and pressure are also important. We will see, John talks about dry gas simulators. If you've got a Datamaster that's using a dry gas simulator here, you're going to have to make a slight adjustment if you then take that Datamaster up to the Porcupine Mountains. Because you're then dealing with a different pressure. You're dealing with a different elevation. And it's actually written into our state rules as to how we need to adjust for this because pressure matters. Temperature also matters. And we see this poor sick girl here, she's got a fever. Core body temperature matters. All right, now it's not huge, but if you've got a person who's an 08 with a fever, for every degree, 1 centigrade, 6.8% higher. And I've seen this more often than not. You get a police agency that their simulators, they're blowing into their Datamaster, and the numbers are sky high. It's like a 12, it's a 13, it's a 14. Like, oh my God, our Datamaster broke. We don't know what to do. Call Marv Geyer, call Marv Geyer. And Marv comes on out and he replaces the simulator, not the Datamaster. It's because the thermometer, or the mercury, regulating the temperature, it's not working, okay? It's heating it up too high. It's gotten too hot. and it's blowing these numbers that it's using an 08 solution, but it's blowing a 14. Now, there's a reason why we use simulators, and that's to ensure that there's no drift on the Datamaster. But the simulator, if it's heating up the solution too high, that's going to be one of Henry's assumptions.
What number did you say it was for every degree? How
Yeah.
much higher?
6.8.
6.8, thank you.
So, 6.8 increase.
Correct. So an 07 potentially becomes an 08 with a fever.
I'm sorry, say that again.
An 07 becomes an 08 with a fever. Now this is Dr. Robert Borkenstein. This is actually this is the first breathalyzer. Yeah, this was actually, it was later picked up by Smith & Wesson for a period of time there, but this is actually a giant leap forward from the Harger drunkometer. There were some criticisms of this one because it would allow them to dial a drunk. It was all operator controlled. They improved the model. They were trying to make it, near its later stages, they were trying to make it self-automated so the officers couldn't tinker around with it. And the officers could. They could dial it up and make you drunk, just at their discretion type of thing. And so it was criticized on that, and they wanted to automate it, but by the time that they got around to actually automating it, infrared testing was starting to come around. And infrared replaces these other devices, takes over the market. Now we've got preliminary breath testing units. I've got them both set up back there. I'm running a little bit late here. But I've got the preliminary breath testing units back there. These are both models that I've got that are back there. The Alka Sensor 3 is too old. Doesn't work well at all. The fuel cell's shot on it. My LifeLock FC10, you're more than welcome to play around with it, except know that probably 100 other people have had their mouths on that too, and I ain't changing it for you. But what these fuel cells are, they're tiny little wafers of an inert chemical that's covered with platinum. Am I getting that right, John? Like a wafer.
Platinum black.
Yeah, platinum black. And when you blow into it, if alcohol is present, it's going to be broken down. It's going to take the hydrogen off to the bottom and create water.
It disassembles the ethanol molecule, turns it into hydrogen, water, and carbon dioxide passing through something else in the meantime.
Right, and this will create a circuit. And the circuit,
Bottom line is generate some electrons.
right, and the circuit can then be amplified and measured and correlate with what we presume to be an alcohol reading. Now, these preliminary breath test manufacturers are evil people. They will tell you all day long that their devices are more accurate than a Datamaster or any of the other infrared testing equipment out there. It's not true. There are none of the safeguards that are present on infrared testing devices are present on the preliminary breath test. Fuel cells do enjoy some greater specificity for alcohol where it doesn't have interfering substances, but that is subject to debate. There was an article just a couple of years ago, made national headlines, or global headlines I should say, and it came out like Germany or London or something like that. Don't get caught driving after sucking a fisherman's friend. A fisherman's friend is a, yeah, I know. That's why I made headlines. Fisherman's friend is some type of a cough drop out there. Some kid blew, and he blew real high, like a .15 or something like that. And it's because of probably, I would assume, methanol in the cough drop, you know.
I just had my Surinamian client had a fisherman's friend who got positive test.
There you go.
PBT and then they tested it.
Yeah, yeah. So, but they'll tell you that no, doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Especially you know, LifeLock. They'll send in their people for a probation violation and claim that .002 that shows that he was drinking alcohol the night before. No, it doesn't. It doesn't prove that at all. Another problem. Yes, sir.
I think that somebody had on one of the forums a guy test positive when he ate a bologna sandwich.
That's probably the bread. The bread, keep in mind, has sugars, carbs, and yeasts. And Justin Mcshane, he's a DUI defense attorney from Pennsylvania. Really a smart guy, much smarter than me. Okay. Yeah. So.
He makes Nichols look like slum.
He knows it. He knows this stuff back and forth. But he's got a demonstrative video on YouTube where he sits there and he chews up white bread like this for like 3 minutes. Okay, it's almost a trick, but it's not a trick. Okay, he's chewing it and he's doing the whole Henry Law thing, right? By closing the system, keeping that mouth closed while he chews it up, and he's allowing alcohol to form inside of his mouth, and then he blows into the PBT and it produces numbers. The PBT is actually measuring alcohol. It's alcohol that's created from the bread. And you'll hear about how white bread can cause alcohol. And it does. It's because alcohol is very common. The fermentation, okay, very simple. Happens all the time.
And because the PBT does not have,
Well, I don't think that slope detection would matter for that. It's just, all that it's doing is taking a snapshot.
Can you explain slope detection just a little bit?
We will do that later.
Okay.
That's complicated. All right, the accuracy claims by the preliminary breath test manufacturers are wildly exaggerated. There is no slope detection system, meaning that if you take a shot of whiskey and you blow into a PBT, it's going to give you a snapshot and it's going to say, man, that guy's almost dead, because it doesn't measure repeated points. And another thing, cannot be used repeatedly. Okay, you cannot line up the kids at a party that you just busted as a police officer and have them all blowing. You got to think of that fuel cell in there. Once the chemical process begins, it needs time to clear itself. So if you're lining up all the kids and they're all blowing into it, you're going to have a kid somewhere in there, or potentially you'll have a kid somewhere in that line that hasn't drank, but he's still going to get a positive reaction because all the people prior to him had a positive reaction.
Would that work with the same individual repeatedly blowing into the...
Yes.
How long does it take these things to clear?
I don't know. Every device is going to be different, and I mean, the LifeLock FC10 it has actually made some remarkable improvements over the older technology, but at its heart, at its core, it's still a fuel cell. So we can add fancier electronics to it. We can even maybe add a little pump that will manually evacuate the air sample chamber or something like that. It's just a fuel cell.
Just for practical purposes, if you're challenging the PDT, like an MIP case, do you ask for that in like a FOIA request? That's something you ask for? Like
Yeah,
manual
I'll ask for the logs.
Well, like, I know you get the logs, but
Yeah.
do you say, okay, what specific type of unit it was, and then do you have a manual for it, or tell me what?
I've got the manuals. They're about useless. The state manual is useless. Because the state manual is just PBT. You can get the actual manual from the manufacturer, and those oftentimes have good information in them. It'll say things like, don't use this if it's below 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and don't use it above 92 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just an example. Actually, the numbers are published out there. You'll have PBTs that get too hot, and you'll have PBTs that are too cold. It'll say in the manufacturer specs, don't do this to 10 people within a 5-minute period or something. Good stuff that you can use, but the state manual, that's just useless. Incidentally, I should add, this afternoon I was going to cover some of the law and regulations and that sort. All of these preliminary breath testing units are DOT approved as evidential breath testing devices. Evidential breath testing devices. In other words, they are on par, according to the feds, with the Datamaster, the Intoxilyzer 5000, the ECIR, okay? And they are clearly not. But the federal government standards are that it must accurately measure a certain amount of alcohol and do it accurately. That's pretty much what the feds require. It doesn't require all this other fancy stuff that comes with the evidential breath testing devices. Now, on to infrared, because we do have to get moving here, and we should have our food here. And we do have John Fusco here too. So, oh, the food's here. Why don't you take it on into the other room if you could? Over here? Yes, please. Over here.
Oh, there's going to be a break. There's like 15 right now in course in the last first semester.
I understood your argument because you think the lower
Typically what our
the
guys.
should be the higher number, should be the higher number, 57. No, it didn't. Yours made sense because
It's going to be just a couple more minutes, and then what we're going to do, we're not going to really break.
Hey, put a lid on it.
We're not really going to break for lunch because we've got John here, and John's time is more valuable than my time sitting up here spewing hot air. I want to hear from John, and I know that you want to hear from John, so let's, in just a minute here, after he's got it set up, we'll take a quick break, smoke a cigarette, use the bathroom, get food, bring it back on in here, and we'll go right back at it, okay? Now, let me just wrap up here. Infrared devices, okay? Infrared devices, I want you to think of infrared not as light, I want you to think of it as heat, okay? This is like predator, okay? Heat. But heat is also light. Ouch. Here's your light spectrum, okay? Light spectrum goes all the way down really, really small to gamma rays. That's what created the Fantastic Four, right? It's exposure to gamma rays. Very, very small. Up to very, very large radio waves. Things that, you know, here's the Earth's diameter up here, and we've got radio waves that are up there in that area. Microwaves, then you got the infrared, then you got visible light, and then you got ultraviolet, and then you got the smaller ones like gamma rays down in here, okay? When we talk about the Datamaster, when we talk about infrared testing devices, we will talk about microns. A micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. The wavelength of the light that we see is from 0.4 microns, which is blue light, to 0.7 microns, red light. It is such a tiny little band that we actually see in. It's crazy that there's all this other light out there. But you think of light because you've been born to know light from dark, you know, daytime versus nighttime, and you see visible light, and it just becomes confusing. I don't understand. What are they shooting a laser through it? I don't understand anything about lasers. Forget about it. It's a heat source, okay? And heat gets absorbed. Heat gets absorbed just like when you sit down on your couch and the pillow underneath you is nice and warm, and then you move on over. Oh, wait, better example. Cool, like the other side of a pillow, right? The heat gets absorbed onto the pillow, you flip it on over and it's cool, it's absorbed, right? Okay? The Omicron Intoxilyzer was the first infrared testing device. This comes around in the 70s. It used a single micron measurement of 3.39, and then at some point thereafter they changed it to 3.42. I was trying to find something that John had showed me some years ago. There's this library index of infrared spectrometry that's out there. It's really cool. You can plug in just about any substance, and you can get the whole printout of what the infrared thing is for a substance. Okay? It's what?
This website.
Is it NIST?
Yeah.
Wow.
Standard.
Okay. Now, we don't test the entire range though. We only look at certain bandwidths. That's what the Datamaster does. It looks for a specific micron level, and then it'll look at a different micron level through, again, a light source that we're going to think of as heat. We're going to look at very, very narrow bandwidths to see what's in that sample. And in this case, with the Omicron, 3.39 and 3.42. This is important because this is where alcohol is rapidly absorbed. There's other areas where it's not. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go through the other breath testing units and then we're going to break. This is the Intoxilyzer 5000. It's probably got more play than the other breath testing devices out on the market. It's been around for a long time, and I don't know why it got so popular, but it did. This is the updated version of the Omicron Intoxilyzer. This company has been plagued by the fact that they won't turn over their source code. You read about source code litigation. This is where it's important. They serve the president in a restroom in an airport in this place, and they'd serve him with a subpoena this way, and he's constantly hiding, no, I'm not him, I'm not him. And he gets subpoenaed, he gets fined, he still won't turn over the source code because he says it's proprietary. They came out with the Intoxilyzer 8000. Now this one's a little bit fancier looking, isn't it? It's the 5000's replacement, but it's been slow to get adopted in most states. It's been rejected in many states, and down in Florida it got kicked. After it had been accepted, it got kicked. The Intoxilyzer 8000, I don't know why they made this business decision, but they were testing down in the 3.39 micron level, okay? They decided to switch up to a 9.36. Now I told you earlier about the bonds, okay, in the alcohol molecule. This is testing the carbon and the oxygen bond up there in this 9.36, as opposed to that carbon and hydrogen bond, which is tested down in the 3.39 area. The Intoxilyzer also uses a steady light stream. Does not use a chopper wheel. Is that right, John?
The 8,000?
The 8,000.
Not use a chopper wheel.
And I don't understand how it, maybe that is like a laser. It's weird.
Well, they're using a pulse.
Oh, it's a pulse.
Source lamp.
Okay,
And that's how they achieve their,
okay,
their signal. They're getting two filters because they actually take the optical filters themselves and they glue them to the face of the detector.
okay.
So they
But
don't
why
need
pulse?
anything to move in there.
Oh, because they don't want moving parts.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, it's been plagued by problems. I don't know if those problems are primarily due to the company's reluctance to turn over source code, or if they're real problems. I think, doesn't the Intoxilyzer also, 8000 also have a fuel cell as well?
No.
No? Okay. Now, the ECIR, it does. The latest version of the ECIR utilizes an electrical chemical sensor, i.e. a fuel cell, as well as infrared. The infrared system is capable of measuring both alcohol and supposedly, according to the literature, carbon dioxide concentrations. That's what they say. I've never seen one or worked with it. The instrument also contains, quote, advanced radio frequency interference immunity. Now, there's been, when I spoke earlier about amplification of a signal, whether you're dealing with a preliminary breath testing unit or an infrared breath testing unit, radio frequency interference is an issue that has been hotly debated because the introduction of extraneous forms of energy will make a test go screwy. Okay. Basically, all that the Datamaster is a fancy voltage regulator. It's detecting voltages here and there and saying, oh, well, based upon this, this is what the result is. If you get extraneous forms of electromagnetic energy that interferes with it, and they found this with the old, not the Draeger, the Borkenstein's breathalyzer. They said this is not a problem, and then all of a sudden they found out that it was a problem, and a national memo went out that police officers needed to keep those big chunky radios that they used to carry everywhere away from the breath machine. And it was hotly debated, and Borkenstein was involved in the debate, and everyone was all, what are we going to do? This is going to stop breath testing. And I think it was Borkenstein just said, just keep the radios out of the room. And they said, oh, okay, we'll do that. Now, Michigan has gone back on itself, and we'll talk about that this afternoon. They just say, well, we don't recommend that you have a radio around. It's an easy way of trying to screw you out of a defense. But meanwhile, National Patent Analytics Systems continues to develop a better casing in order to try and stop radio frequency interference from affecting a breath test. So if this isn't an important issue, of course, they're not going to spend the money to do it. And you can see up here, I've got this little radio antenna right here. This is a big deal, okay? The question is you know, what result, and have we adequately safeguarded against it at this point? But the ECIR is claiming that they've got this advanced radio frequency interference immunity, which I think what they mean there is that they've got a solid case, just like the Datamaster DMT does. And the ECIR also has a centralized data collection using the optional IntoxNet software. In other words, it can convey data. It can also be remotely worked on. But this is where the Datamaster actually collects its name from. Well, I don't know. John's talked about this, but the Datamaster has this ability, and it's got a modem cable or a telephone thing on the back. They're able to send out data, okay? It's able to save all this stuff. And Michigan didn't want that option. And of course, National Patent Analytics Systems is going to provide them with the instrument that they order. Why did the Michigan State Police decide that they didn't want to collect the data? You know? Because you, as a defense attorney, might say, you know, I'd like to see the last 100. Give me the last 100. Out in Washington State, incidentally, all this simulator tests and that sort of stuff that you have to go fighting and breaking down doors to get for simulator tests and what's going on here and what's going on there, it's all published on the internet. You want to find out about the machine that's over in Spokane. Look it up. It's there. It's published on the internet.
South Carolina is too.
Yeah. Alcatest 7110 MK3C. This is the Drager machine, okay? The Drager machine came to light a few years ago. It was, I believe, the first device that was testing up in the 9.5 micron range, okay, just like the Intox 8000. So it's testing at that higher level. And down here, this is in their literature, okay? They cite A.W. Jones in their literature, saying that there is quote, less interference from acetone and hydrocarbons in this range. Our machine is better, okay? Our machine is the best thing since sliced bread because we figured out 9.5 micron range, folks. Well, they also tested for expired breath temperature. You'll recall that we talked about temperature when a person has a fever. They started to test for it. Hey, yeah, because that's a cross-examination question. Did you take my client's temperature, officer? If they're using the Drager, yes, I did. And it was normal. The Drager also combines fuel cell technology with infrared. This was the first device that did this. All right, so it's got basically a